For more than 2 months in 1683, the fate of Central Europe hung in the balance. An enormous Ottoman army stood before the walls of Vienna. Cannons thundered day and night. Beneath the earth, men dug tunnels packed with explosives, hoping to tear the city apart from below. This was not just a siege. It was a confrontation between empires, between expansion and resistance, between a rising power and a desperate defense. To understand how Vienna became the center of this struggle, we must look at the growing strength of the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, the Ottomans had expanded steadily into southeastern Europe. They had conquered Constantinople in 1453. They had pushed deep into the Balkans. Hungary had already fallen under their control after the Battle of Mohacs in 1526. By the late 17th century, the Ottoman Empire was one of the most powerful states in the world. At the same time, the Habsburg monarchy ruled vast territories in Central Europe. Vienna, the Habsburg capital, was more than a city. It was a symbol of Christian resistance against Ottoman expansion. The frontier between the two powers had long been unstable, marked by raids, skirmishes, and uneasy truces. Tension never truly disappeared. In the early 1680s, the Ottoman Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha, saw an opportunity. The Habsburgs were distracted by conflicts elsewhere. Internal unrest weakened parts of their Hungarian territories. Kara Mustafa believed that a decisive strike against Vienna could break Habsburg power once and for all. If Vienna fell, the road into the heart of Europe would lie open. In the spring of 1683, a massive Ottoman army began its march. Estimates vary, but it likely numbered well over 100,000 soldiers supported by artillery and engineers. The army moved slowly but relentlessly across Hungary, overwhelming fortresses and scattering resistance. Fear spread ahead of them. Vienna was not fully prepared for such a massive assault. Many civilians fled the city. Emperor Leopold I left Vienna to seek support from other European rulers. The defense of the city fell to Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg. He commanded a garrison of roughly 15,000 soldiers and several thousand armed citizens. They faced an army many times their size. By July 1683, the Ottomans had encircled Vienna. The siege began in earnest. Artillery fire pounded the walls, but the Ottomans relied not only on cannons. Their engineers dug elaborate tunnels beneath the fortifications. The goal was to place explosives under the walls and detonate them, creating breaches through which troops could storm the city. Inside Vienna, conditions deteriorated quickly. Food supplies ran low, disease spread, buildings were damaged by constant bombardment. Yet the defenders refused to surrender. They repaired walls at night. They launched countermines, digging their own tunnels to intercept the Ottoman explosives. Fighting often took place underground in darkness, with only torches to light the way. Weeks passed. The Ottoman forces succeeded in blowing up sections of the outer defenses. Each time, the defenders rushed to build makeshift barricades. Casualties mounted on both sides. Kara Mustafa grew impatient. He believed Vienna was close to collapse. He was determined to capture the city intact, hoping to claim it as a jewel of the Ottoman Empire. Beyond the walls, however, a coalition was forming. The Habsburgs had appealed for help across Europe. The most important ally came from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. King John III Sobieski answered the call. An experienced commander, Sobieski gathered his forces and marched south toward Vienna. By early September, relief armies from various German states joined the Polish forces. Together they formed a large coalition army. Their objective was clear: Vienna must not fall. If it did, the balance of power in Europe could shift dramatically. On September 12, 1683, the decisive battle took place on the Kahlenberg Hills overlooking Vienna. The coalition forces launched a coordinated attack against the Ottoman positions. Fighting was fierce and chaotic. The Ottomans had built fortified camps and defensive lines. For hours, neither side gained a decisive advantage. Then came one of the most famous cavalry charges in European history. King John III Sobieski led thousands of Polish winged hussars down the hillside toward the Ottoman camp. The charge was massive and overwhelming. Ottoman lines began to break. Confusion spread through their ranks. As coalition infantry and cavalry pressed forward, the Ottoman army collapsed into retreat. Kara Mustafa's forces abandoned their camps, artillery, and supplies. The siege was lifted. Vienna had survived. The defeat was a turning point. The Ottoman Empire, which for centuries had been regarded as one of the most powerful and seemingly unstoppable forces in Europe, had suffered a major and highly visible setback. For generations, Ottoman armies had advanced steadily across southeastern Europe, conquering territories and forcing kingdoms to submit or retreat. The Siege of Vienna in 1683 was meant to continue that expansion and secure a decisive victory in Central Europe. Instead, the failed siege revealed that the empire's advance could be stopped. In the years that followed, the balance of power in the region began to shift. The Habsburg monarchy, strengthened by the victory and supported by its allies, launched new campaigns against Ottoman-controlled territories. These military efforts pushed southward across the Hungarian plains and into regions that had been under Ottoman influence for decades. Fortresses that once served as strongholds of Ottoman authority were gradually reclaimed. Large parts of Hungary, long contested between the two powers, slowly returned to Habsburg control. This wider conflict became known as the Great Turkish War. It involved multiple European states and lasted for many years after the events at Vienna. Battles were fought across Central and Eastern Europe, and alliances shifted as both sides attempted to strengthen their positions. The war reshaped borders and political influence across the region. What had begun as a dramatic siege of one city evolved into a prolonged struggle that would redefine the relationship between the Ottoman Empire and the European powers. For Vienna itself, the siege became a defining moment in its history. The city had endured weeks of relentless bombardment, the constant threat of underground explosions, and the slow exhaustion of food and supplies. Its population lived in fear as the walls were damaged and the enemy drew closer. Yet, despite these hardships, the defenders held their ground and refused to surrender. Their survival transformed the meaning of the city in the eyes of Europe. The successful defense strengthened the authority of the Habsburg rulers and reinforced Vienna's role as the center of their expanding realm. In the years after the siege, the city continued to grow in political influence, cultural importance, and architectural development. Vienna would later become one of the most important capitals in Europe, known not only for its strategic position, but also for its art, music, and intellectual life. The memory of the siege echoed through generations. Stories of the defenders, the relief army, and the dramatic final battle were retold in chronicles, paintings, and historical accounts. For many people in Central Europe, the defense of Vienna represented a moment when cooperation between different states and armies had prevented a catastrophic defeat. The events of that year remain deeply embedded in the historical identity of the region. The siege also revealed something important about the nature of power and empire. The Ottoman army had marched toward Vienna with enormous confidence. Its leaders believed that victory was within reach and that the city would soon fall after sustained pressure. The size of the army, the strength of its artillery, and the reputation of Ottoman military success all seemed to point toward a certain outcome. The Second Turkish Siege of Vienna was therefore not merely a military event. It represented a confrontation between two expanding worlds and two competing visions of influence in Europe. The Ottoman Empire sought to extend its reach deeper into the continent, while the Habsburgs and their allies fought to protect their territories and maintain their power. The siege was the moment where these ambitions collided most dramatically. In many ways, the siege marked the high point of Ottoman expansion into Central Europe. After 1683, the momentum that had once carried Ottoman armies steadily forward began to weaken. The defeat did not end the power of the empire, but it did signal a change in direction. Future conflicts would increasingly push the Ottomans back rather than allow them to advance further west. Vienna had endured one of the most dangerous moments in its history and emerged still standing. Its survival carried enormous symbolic weight for the Habsburg monarchy and for the wider European alliance that had come to its defense. The victory strengthened confidence among the defenders and reshaped how the balance of power in the region was perceived. With the siege lifted and the Ottoman army in retreat, a new chapter in European history began. The struggle between the Habsburgs and the Ottoman Empire would continue, but the events of 1683 had changed its direction. From that moment forward, the story of Central Europe would be shaped not by the advance of Ottoman armies toward Vienna, but by the gradual pushback that followed their defeat.